Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into a special edition of the Farzy Show. We had some breaking news from the Philadelphia Inquirer, most notably Keith Pompey. Make sure you guys are following Keith Pompey in the Twitterverse and all social media as well. Keith just dropped a story on Inquirer.com that you should all check out about the Pistons, the Cavaliers, and the Indiana Pacers having interest in Sixers forward Tobias Harris. You guys can go to Inquirer.com and check out the rest of this story. And joining us right now is Mr. Keith Pompey. Keith, how are you, man?
What's good, man? How you been?
I've been fantastic. Thanks for joining us, man. I appreciate it. Now, this stuff about Tobias Harris, when did all this stuff start to really kick up? When have teams started calling about Tobias Harris and potentially making a trade?
Teams have been kicking up. I shouldn't say teams have been acquiring about Tobias from what I'm hearing recent, a couple weeks now. I want to say 2 weeks ago. Now here's the thing. This is nothing new, right? And what I mean by that is the last couple years during the trade deadline and then during the season, the Sixers have been seeing what was out there for Tobias. But it just seems like right now there's a couple of teams, the Detroit, for instance, the Cavs and Indiana, that really are looking to add veteran depth and adding Tobias leadership to their team. So those are the three teams.
Now, one of the things that you point out in the article is a phrase, outrageous returns, outrageous packages in returns. That's what Daryl Morey and the 76ers are looking for. What do you think is realistic about a return when it comes to Tobias Harris?
It's weird. To me, it's kind of it depends on. And if I'm Daryl Morey, I get it. You don't want to mess up your team, right? But let's just say if you can get Buddy Hield for Tobias Harris and maybe add another player in the mix to match that salary, I think that will work out well. And I think that will be something that both teams would really love to have. You know what I mean? The Sixers could use a Buddy Hield on their team.
This makes me think of moving on from Ben Simmons, and I remember the draft night where there was a chance the Sixers could move on from Ben Simmons. There was conversation about the San Antonio Spurs, and apparently Daryl Morey's ask was 5 first-round picks, and it was something crazy like that. Is that the type of outrageous things we're talking about, but more on a Tobias Harris level?
Yeah, more on the Tobias Harris level. It's I need an all-star. I need a rising all-star, like a future all-star, and I need a first-round pick. And some teams aren't trying to do things like that. Yeah, it's kind of the crazy part is they were when Ben Simmons, they were trying to get rising stars from the Golden State Warriors, and you're right, and 5 first-round picks. Tobias is more or less give us a first-round pick, but we want an all-star player in return, things like that. So, but what it is one of those things where, and I respect it, it's one of those things where I feel like Daryl Morey feels look, right now we don't know what we're going to do with James, right? We hope that James comes back. But at the same time, if you're going to take Tobias from us and we don't know if James is coming back, you got to give us something that we can move forward with, so where we can remain an elite team.
Are the Sixers, and you talk about this in the article, and I, again, want to flash it up there for people that haven't seen it yet on Inquirer.com. You talk about it in the article, how the Sixers still like Tobias Harris, and they feel like his ceiling is higher with Nick Nurse as the head coach as opposed to Doc Rivers. How much better do you think a guy like Tobias Harris will get under Nick Nurse?
You know what? Basing it off of what Nick Nurse has done, with Toronto, we look at Pascal Siakam, you look at Chris Boucher, guys like that. A couple of years ago, you look at Pascal and you say, some people could argue that he's a better player than Tobias, right? Some people can argue that, but you didn't say that 3 years ago. And I think when you look at what Nick Nurse, how he developed those type of guys, and you can see what he can do with Tobias. I mean, we look at it. All these guys are around the same size, 6'8", 6'9". They're athletic for their position. And I feel like a guy like Tobias playing under Nick Nurse, yes, he should take a step forward. Now, again, another thing that Nick did was he had a balanced attack. And those are the type of offenses that Tobias Harris thrives under. Now, again, you got Joel, you got James, but at the same time, I could see Nick Nurse utilizing Tobias more than Doc Rivers did.
when it comes to other guys involved in this offense, like Joel Embiid, for instance, I know a lot of people are talking about the idea of him potentially being more of a facilitator under Nick Nurse. Does that mean that there's going to be a lot more movement around Joel Embiid, and is Tobias Harris expected to be a bigger part of that?
You know what? I don't. Like, what I'm doing is right now. I'm assuming because Nick never came out and said what he's doing. So what he's going to do, but what I'm assuming is looking at what he did when he was in Toronto, and I do feel like because Nick is big on ball movement. He's big on guys cutting. He's big on a lot of different things. Whereas in the past, when you looked at the Sixers, it was kind of one of those things where Tobias stayed in the corner unless one of those guys are out. I feel like if Nick Nurse implements the offense that he implemented in Toronto, those are things that I don't know what the plays are going to be like, but those are things that are better, fit more with Tobias Harris' game than what Doc Rivers did with Joel. Now, again, you have to feed the big man. That's the most important thing. But at the same time, I think that is set up for a guy like Tobias to take a lot more pressure off of Joel and make things easier because the movement is going to be there.
All right. Do you think Tobias Harris is going to be a 76er after Thursday night's NBA draft?
Right now I do. I mean, right now, but you never know what can happen at the 11th hour. Like, you never know if the 76ers say, hey, okay, somebody's going to offer us something that where we can replace them. You don't know that now, but right now, and until they figure out James, and if the Sixers don't get something, I think Tobias has to be here. I don't think that you can trade him right now. But again, if you can get something, if you can get multiple pieces, multiple parts that can help you, again, if somebody's willing to overpay for him, yeah, I think that Tobias can get moved. But right now, I don't see it. I just don't see it.
All right, moving on to some other names that are out there. Obviously, right now, James Harden, you've mentioned him a couple of times already. Early talk was 4 years, 210 maybe million max deal, the whole thing for James Harden to return to Philly, or 200 million to go back to Houston potentially. What do you think the future holds for James Harden and the 76ers?
You know what? I'm starting, a month ago, if you would have asked me this, I would have said James was definitely going to Houston. I would. And you know what? When things really changed to me was when we saw Jalen Green on Paul George's podcast. And Jalen Green was Jalen Green was being nice, but Paul George was like, hey, man, I don't know if that's going to be a good fit for you. And then you see Jalen like nodding his head, At that point, I'm like, maybe some of the players don't want James back, right? And then after that, I talked to a source who said, hey, the Sixers aren't really trying to mess up their short or long-term like salary cap, right? So at that point, you're figuring like, okay, well, they're only going to give him probably 2 years. And then after that, Houston comes out, and then you're hearing from sources in Houston saying they don't want to give him a lot of years either. So at that particular point, I start believing that I think James is coming back. I do. I think he's coming. As much as he says, he loves Houston, they love him. I think that with all things being equal, I could see James actually coming back to Philly. I honestly think he will come back to Philly.
I got to tell you, I'm right there with you, and I certainly don't have the sources that you do, but as this has gone on, it's the same thing. A month ago, no way he's back. They're not having him back, and now it seems like almost inevitable that he's going to return here in Philadelphia. So I'll ask you this. Assuming that James Harden does come back, how much does Nick Nurse have to do with the idea that he does choose to come back to Philadelphia?
You mean how much does he have to deal with it, or how much does the Nick Nurse thing impact it?
Impact it.
You know what? I think it impacts it a lot. I do. I think, but at the same time, I think that Nick Nurse is going to have, real talk with him, and say to him, look, James, you guys were better when you were more of the facilitator, and we have to go through Joel. Yes, we're going to try to, make it a little bit more balanced. But I feel like, that's the thing. But James wants to play more freely, right? He wants to be able to show us that he could be James Harden, had 45 points in game 1 and 42 in game 4, right? That's great. But I don't know if that type of James is going to win a championship playing alongside Joel Embiid. So I think it's going to be, yes, it's great that they have a new coach. He wasn't coming back if Doc was going to be here, right? It was great that they have a new coach, but I think it's up to Nick Nurse to have a straight up conversation with him to say, like, look, this is how we're going to win.
Okay. How much do you think this team is going to change under Nick Nurse? Will it be substantial? You talked about the ball movement before. You talked about, I know people talked about defensively, how much Nick Nurse likes to really run at players and make sure that he has a solid defense there as well. So how much will this team really be changed? Would you consider it almost an overhaul in their style of play?
You know what? I really like Nick Nurse. I do. I really like Nick Nurse as a coach. I remember one time I was walking down the hallway. It was before a game against the Sixers. I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, Nick, man, you know, I don't know if you really know me. I asked you a couple questions before, but I'm a big fan of you as a coach, your in-game adjustments, everything like that." With that being said, I think that close games, he'll be able to pull it out, right? But however, the one thing is, you got to be real with yourself. Like, this was a good team. If Joel Embiid continues to play like he did in big playoff games, like Game 7, if James Harden plays the way he does, I don't care if Red Auerbach is the coach. Or, I mean, seriously, I don't. Like, if your two stars come out and they struggle like that, you know, it's hard. I mean, you know what I mean? Like Greg Popovich, Pat Riley. I mean, like, it's hard to win a Game 7 if your two stars struggle the way they did. So, yes, Nick Nurse can help them, but I think it's up to James Harden and Joel Embiid to do the work.
I'm 100% with you there. Now, what does this mean for Tyrese Maxey? Because, I mean, I look at a guy like Pascal Siakam, and yes, I give most credit to Pascal Siakam, and the development was on his shoulders and how much better he got. But how much of that development with Tyrese Maxey can we look forward to under Nick Nurse?
Oh, I think a lot. I mean, when we look at you look at like Fred Van Vliet, right? You know, who, like, this is a guy, and I'm not saying who was he, but this was a guy who was unheralded, you know, coming out of Wichita State. I mean, you look at the growth that Nick and them had with them. I mean, we're looking at, and I know losing Sam Cassell is huge, but you look at some of the player development coaches that this team has in Toronto. You look at how Nick tries to get the best out of players. You know, Tyrese Maxey was a fringe all-star before he was injured, right? A fringe all-star before he was injured. So I expect him to take another step forward this season. And I think that when we look at this coach's track record of developing players, like, he got a lot of flack this year because he didn't really develop the young guys because he wanted to win. But if you look at his track record the other years that he was there, I think that bodes well for Tyrese Maxey's development and his role with the team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nick Nurse took that heat in Toronto for not playing the younger guys and just driving the veterans into the ground, certainly. When it comes to the free agent class, which we all know isn't a lot worth bragging about right now, is there anyone out there that you see as not only likely to join the Sixers, but somebody you would think would be a great fit here in Philadelphia?
You know, it's crazy because, you know, it's like when you see these names coming out, but of elite players, right? Like all-star caliber players, but there's no way in heck the Sixers can afford them, especially with, you know, this new collective bargaining and everything that they did, right? So it's kind of hard. Like, I mean, there might be some, like, I honestly, especially if James comes back, you know, unless they can trade Tobias Harris, unless they can do that, I honestly think the Sixers are going to have to hopefully get a quality pick in the second round that they can develop, right? And also probably bring their team back. I mean, because if not, you're going to be adding like minimum salary type guys, or you may be able to do this and that. But I just don't see it, man. I really don't. I don't think the Sixers have a lot of flexibility for me to go out there and say at this particular time, you can go out there and get this guy who's going to help upgrade your roster. I just see guys who can maybe fill in as rotation guys, if that. But I don't see any star quality guys because of their financial situation.
Yeah, the way I've been putting it is with the Sixers right now, Nick Nurse is your biggest free agent signing of the offseason. I mean, if they sign James Harden, then it's kind of like you're running it back, but with a different head coach. So who's the other guy that's going to come in here and really, I don't know, try to help put him over the top? And I don't think that guy is out there for the Sixers to afford. I'll put it that way.
Exactly.
Keith, looking at the draft then, looking at the Thursday night's draft, are the Sixers really going to sit this out? What's the likelihood? What are the odds that the Sixers actually make a trade somehow and get a pick somewhere, first or second round in Thursday night's draft?
I think the likelihood is a strong likelihood that the Sixers could get in the second round. I think that's easy for them. I think there's going to be a lot of picks out there for them to take. The thing about this draft is extremely top heavy, right? We think about it. You got like 5 guys, right? And then after that, whatever, everybody's talking about it. But I think and I was talking to an executive. The guy said, Keith, look, the Sixers aren't, if they can get in the second round, they're not going to be that bad for this year's draft because the 23rd pick is probably going to be the same as the 37th pick. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's just so many guys that we're going to see slide and guys who move up based off of need. So I think it's likely that the Sixers do grab someone. And here's the thing, and what I mean by adding depth, like it could be someone that they pick up and they can make that person, that second round pick, a two-way player. They're going to have 3 two-way players this year in the NBA. So they can get a two-way player out of it, a guy that they could develop. He's going to be cheap, and that's going to help them with the cap space.
Mm-hmm. Keith, last thing for you here, and it has to do with James Harden, has to do with Tyrese Maxey. This term, gap year, has come about now. The Sixers, if they don't bring back Harden, if they don't, you and I are both in the thought process that they will bring him back. But if they don't, I'm going to ask you this question. So let's say the Sixers do bring back Harden. What's their ceiling next year? And if the Sixers decide to have that gap year with just Tobias Harris, with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey at the helm, and of course Nick Nurse as well, what do you think their ceiling is then, with or without Harden, and then also with just Tyrese Maxey, Tobias Harris, and Joel Embiid?
The thing is, I still think that the Sixers are going to have a tough time this year and next year. I mean, and why I'm saying this is I'm looking at the Boston Celtics, right? I mean, the Boston Celtics are making a lot of moves right now, right? Kristaps Porzingis, right? They're going to pick him up. Come on, man. Like, that's what they need, right? That's what they need. So you have that. You look at the Milwaukee Bucks. The Milwaukee Bucks, if they can re-sign their players, some of their players, like, they're going to be a phenomenal team again. And then, the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat, they have Jimmy Butler. That's all we have to say. So when you look at the Sixers team, it's all up to Joel Embiid and James Harden. And to me, I don't know if they're better than Milwaukee or Boston. I even with Joel and James, I don't think so. Now, but the problem is if you lose James Harden, right? When we look at this roster, you say Tyrese Maxey, phenomenal young guard, right? But what Tyrese Maxey is, he's an undersized 2 guard. That's what he is. He's not a point guard. So if you take James Harden off the ball, if you lose him, you're losing your best facilitator, you're losing your best ball handler. And I feel like the 76ers are going to take a step back without James Harden.
Mm-hmm. Here's where I'm at with it. I just still see them both as second round exits. One might be in a second round. They might get swept with Maxey and Embiid. The other might be another game 7, but I still just see them losing in the second round, unfortunately. Now, hopefully Nick Nurse does come in here. Hopefully he is some sort of genius that knows how to orchestrate the talent that is here already, and he'll know how to get out of that second round. Then, of course, go to the ultimate prize, which is the championship here. That's what I'll be crossing my fingers for there, Keith.
Yeah. Well, I would love to cover Eastern Conference Final. I would love to do that.
I'm sure. Everyone, make sure you guys are checking out Keith's stuff on Inquirer.com. You can check out this article that's on there right now. It just dropped a couple hours ago. Make sure you guys check it out. And also follow Keith Pompey on Twitter as well. And on his Twitter feed, he does have the story right there, so you guys can click on that and give it a read. Keith Pompey, Inquirer.com. Always great catching up with you, man. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, my man.
Absolutely. Keith Pompey joining us on the Rothman Orthopedics guest line.